Welcome back to another episode of Taking Inventory. This week, we are so excited to welcome Gokul Rajaram, who is a legend in the ad space and in digital. Gokul was one of the masterminds behind kind of what is now the best advertising business in the world with Google AdSense, was a product leader at Facebook, is on the board of companies like The Trade Desk, Pinterest, was at DoorDash and Square. Gokul, you've been kind of everywhere as either an operator or a board member or an advisor. We are so fortunate to have you today. So excited. So thank you for being here.
Daniel and James, thank you for having me. Really a privilege to be with you guys and excited for the discussion.
Yeah, well, thank you. We appreciate it. You left out, he's also on the board of Coinbase to not make it even more impressive. But, obviously you've accomplished just an unbelievable amount in your career. But, I think, we kind of would love to start off is just like, how'd you get started? How'd you get into tech? Like kind of what's your origin story for people who want to be like you one day?
Well, I basically got a couple of degrees in computer science, and my second degree was I got my undergrad in CS from one of the Indian Institute of Technology in India, and I came to the US for grad school, and I was in the PhD program in computer science at UT Austin. And in the summer, after my first year, I got a summer internship at a company called Sun Microsystems, which was a legendary company. Vinod Khosla and Scott McNeely founded it. Scott was the CEO then, and obviously it's no more. But back then, it was one of the hottest companies in the mid to late 90s. I was a summer intern there, and I worked on writing a bunch of production software that went into production. And I was so excited by the opportunity to write software that actually is used by people versus just in a research project. So after that experience, I came back and I told my advisor that I was dropping out of the PhD program, just getting a master's, and I wanted to write software. And went to join a company called I was always been inspired by companies that build software that's available for consumers to use. So I joined an early internet service provider called Juno Online, which you might have remembered from mid 90s. It was targeting AOL. AOL offered back then, it seems quaint, but you had to pay additional fees on top of it. I mean, they were basically an ISP, and the original ISP. Juno wanted to offer free email. So they basically offered the ability to just sign up and download your. It was back in the era of dial-up lines. So you would download, you would upload your email that you've written or composed on your server. You'd upload it to the server. It would download ads to you along with your email, and then the connection would go off. So you weren't connected to the internet while you were browsing ads. You were like filling out forms in the ads. You're clicking stuff. So all of those clicks, impressions, lead form fills were all stored on your local device. And then it could be for days because you were not connected to the internet. And then when you connected it back to the internet, your computer, then we would upload it back to our servers. And then we would do processing of all the impressions and clicks from a few days ago, right? Think about that was the early days of internet advertising. And I was the tech lead for the ads team at Juno, which was doing this without ever, like, we literally had impressions from a few days ago, right? Think about that's crazy, but that's how it was.
What,
And form fills from a few days ago, and we would send it to, I remember Ford Motor Company did this campaign. We say, oh, this many people filled the form, and then we would send it to Ford. And then it was such not real time, but DoubleClick and Juno were the two big advertising companies back there. DoubleClick was also started in the late 90s in Juno. But think
and
about that.
how did you convince advertisers in the late 90s, like, hey, like, do these ads, you're used to magazine, newspaper, TV, do these ads in this thing called email, and you may show up in 3 days, you may show up in 7, you may show up today. Like, how did you even start convincing people that?
Accountability and measurability, even though it showed up in 3 or 7 days, it was still better than magazine ads and other forms of advertising, which were not measurable at all. So that was the key thing. And we didn't really focus. We typically said next day. Obviously, in some cases, long tail, it would be 3 to 7
Yeah.
days. Typically, it was the same day. People would compose some email and then connect to the computer. It was not real time, but it was still within a day or two, and it was measurable still. We would be able to give. I mean, think about it. Back in the 90s, being able to see how many people saw your ad, how many people clicked on. The notion of a click itself was crazy.
Yeah.
Clicking on an ad and then filling out a form. So you actually get information on these people, because Juno already had information, because when people signed up, they gave all the information. We knew their residential address, where they lived, etc. So you got all this rich demographic info. So we were able to run a lot of campaigns. I think it was never, I think, and the company went public. But yeah, it was, back in the day, you had to come up with various metrics, impressions, clicks, and all kinds of things. DoubleClick was doing the same thing, obviously more real time because it was connected to the web. But yeah, Juno was unfortunately I mean, we didn't pivot fast enough when Hotmail came on the picture and web-based email, Yahoo Mail and Hotmail came, and that, I think, was the challenge. And I think it really told me, I think, any Lee and AOL the same thing. I think AOL didn't pivot fast enough to the web strongly. And obviously, AOL.com was huge, but technology is all about constant change. And as a company, you cannot innovate. You There is no given, there's no I mean, look at IBM. I mean, yeah, all these companies that every decade we think of these companies unstoppable. Microsoft in the 2000s, absolutely, we used to think. Now, I mean, obviously they've come back, but everyone has to go through the wilderness. If we can't innovate and have compound innovations, you're going to get left behind. Five compound innovations is what you need to be a leader. Five is what I've, after studying a lot of companies, you need at least. OpenAI and AI, for example. I think if they just stop with GPT-1, they'd be nowhere. If they just stop with GPT-2, they'd be nowhere. If they stop with GPT, they'd be nowhere. GPT-4, Chat GPT, GPT-4o. Now they've earned the right with five compounding innovations to be one of the top two or three companies. But even now, they probably have to innovate five more times to be the leader.
That's great. Is that, and you've seen that just again and again? Like, are you pattern matching? Like when you see, I'm trying to think, we can use even like maybe someone like Snap right now, like, which is like, kind of beat up in the press, but I think Evan has innovated, like for lack of, anything else, definitely has been innovations there. And so like, have you seen like when someone like that is showing a culture of innovation, are you like, if they can get to the fifth, they got a shot?
Absolutely. I think ultimately great companies are built in technology based on, I think sales teams can only take you that far. I think you've got to have, sometimes you have to buy innovation, but you've got to either build or buy innovation, right? Facebook had an amazing first act with Facebook. And obviously Facebook itself had multiple innovations, news feed, photos, virality, all of those things. But then kudos to Zuck for going out and much in advance, WhatsApp and Insta making those buys. And you hear internally that WhatsApp revenues are now getting to the billions with
Yeah.
messaging and so on. And it took a while, but now it's $1 billion plus revenue business annually. And so you've got to compound. Yeah, Snap, I think I met Evan once or twice because Square and Snapchat if you might remember, they did this thing called Snap Cash for
Yeah.
Cash App.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think he spent some time in our office, some time in theirs. And I was very, very impressed. On a napkin, he could draw these designs and then, just brilliant. And I think that's a kind of founder you need who's excited by the notion of innovation's sake. Some of those won't pan out, but you need five innovations that actually hit, I would say. Each innovation, some innovations don't hit, like Google Wave, no one cares, but you need five meaty innovations that hit, actually, that are used by people, that have
And do
product
you
market.
think those innovations are driven largely founder driven or culture driven? Like as you've kind of
Culture. I think it's culture. It's obviously founder plays a role. Many of them are foundational innovations. Founder has set the vision, but the founder, after a certain scale, can't do everything themselves. So and the founder can probably set a direction, but the details of the innovation matter a lot. The details of exactly how it's priced, in case it's a pricing thing, or how it's presented, how the UI is, all of those things. It is hard for a founder as something goes more complex. So you've got to have great people around you who can who have the unique ability of taking the founder or the CEO's vision and putting it into the product in a way that's compelling.
And have you seen in your career examples of companies that kind of become kind of corporate, sort of financial engineering almost based companies that are able to change and like escape that pattern and get back to like the
I think
innovation?
Microsoft is a great example, right? At scale, we've all seen it, right? For probably a decade, it was a company, I think, that was doing mostly financial engineering and living on the glories of the past and milking Windows and Office revenue. And with Bing, they tried, but they couldn't. They couldn't. And then I think it just tells you. We mentioned the word culture. Satya Nadella, the first thing he did was reset the culture of the company, reset the culture, put into place guiding principles around openness, collaboration, not having fiefdoms, and those ultimately are what lead to greatness, where people feel free. I think Microsoft had become extremely political, and I think removing the politics, obviously you can't eliminate politics in a large company, but removing fiefdoms, saying it's okay to embrace, go to the right thing. We are not just going to be beholden to Windows. We're going to embrace Macs. We're going to embrace iPhones. I think I just saw that finally Microsoft employees are free to use iPhones as much as Android and so on. So I think those kinds of things open up uh, what open up the sense of possibility for the average employee, because a lot of innovation also comes, got to be alert to innovations coming from grassroots. A lot of Square's innovations were grassroots. Cash App was from a hackathon. Square Capital was from a hackathon. A lot of those things are from hackathons. So as you get bigger, a lot of the innovations you've got to nurture and give people the freedom to dream.
You've been at, again, as we mentioned, both an advisor, board member, operator at a lot of big companies. But I think, beyond just being big companies like Google, kind of changed the how kind of tech companies operate. And obviously the founders were very involved and created a very unique culture. Zuckerberg has created a unique culture and is very involved in the business. Square, the Trade Desk, Coinbase, all of these have very notable founders that are still in the operating seat, still very involved in the business. And so, what have you noticed between the difference of like those types of founders versus maybe founders that kind of get the company to a certain point and then kind of take a backseat and maybe join the board, but hand over the reins? Like, is there anything that you notice? I don't know, just difference between those leaders and others?
The biggest interesting thing is that fairly early on, within the first 4 or 5 years, all of these founders brought in a second in command who was almost their peer, essentially their peer. If you look at Tony at DoorDash, he brought in Christopher Payne, who was a president and CEO. And Christopher really ran the business side of DoorDash, leaving Tony to focus on product and really be the CEO. Similarly, Zuck brought in Cheryl fairly early on, Sheryl Sandberg, within the first 4 years of the company, 4 or 5 years. I think 2004, when Alexander Fischel was there in 2008, 2009, and it allowed him to really scale, right? Because I think founders are really good at one or the other. I mean, many of them are product and engineering leaders. Jack at Square brought in Keith Rebois fairly early. And Keith was, I mean, he was instrumental in hiring many of the key folks and building a culture of just execution at the company. And even Larry and Sergey, they brought Eric Schmidt pretty early on. In fact, he became the CEO. So I think the founders who want to be truly great, they don't want to, they want to expand the pie, and they're not shy about bringing in. They're not. I would say many of the founders who I think they want to have control. Maybe the founders who, but these founders, are truly great founders, are fine with giving up, especially if they find the right person. Now it has to be the right person, the right fit, etc. But giving up a chunk of the company so they can focus on what truly matters and having almost a peer who's complements them. And I think that's what you have to do. I think you can't. It's too hard a job to build a generational company by yourself. You can build a company to a certain stage. So you've got to. I personally think the solo founder myth is overrated. Even solo founders have amazing second in commands around them, or amazing leadership teams around them.
Interesting. And for you personally, just given, and again, like if anyone just goes to your LinkedIn, it's pretty wild. But you've been a founder, you sold a company, you've been on these boards, you've done a ton of investing. Have you found, like, through all of that, like, I guess like do you see yourself one day like starting another company, or like have you found that like you are kind of like more of a Kashero archetype? Like, where do you kind of put yourself kind of in your head, how you think about it, like kind of going forward?
At this stage in my life and career, I get energy from helping companies. I realize that's why I call, on LinkedIn, I call myself a company helper. There's nothing more satisfying as an investor advisor, even without any stake to in the company, to just help a founder at some point with this particularly knotty or thorny problem, help them hopefully make some progress, connect them with someone who's maybe encountered that problem, and see the company and the founder succeed, or at least surmount that problem. I think everyone says that your founding experience actually really informs how you think about founding. I was a founder during 2007 to 2000, 2008, 2010, during the global financial crisis, and it was one of the most interesting, educational, also most challenging experiences I will ever have professionally, because the funding markets dried up. It was extremely hard to sell anything to anybody. And it was truly not just relevant to tech, right? It was a cataclysmic thing across all industries, across all economies globally. So it was very hard to run a company. at that time, and that really shaped me. I also realized that one should only start a company when one has a problem one is so passionate about that one cannot sleep. A lot of people who worked for me with me have left on to join companies. Many of them leave to join companies because they have a friend that they want to start a company with, and that's a wrong reason to start a company. Just because you have a friend, you've got to start a company because there's a clearly it has to be authentic. The problem also can't be something you just read about on TechCrunch. It has to be something that comes of lived experience in an industry, in your life. And that's the other thing that I think really differentiates all these companies. I think if you think about Google and Facebook, both were started in university, and DoorDash, all three of them started in school. They were started basically because founders had specific problems where Mark wanted to see what the Harvard yearbook was like and see the faces of all of his Harvard colleagues and classmates, and he created Facebook. So I think creating a company to create a company is almost a cynical exercise. I would rather, my first question, therefore, to founders is tell me your founding story. And the founding story uncovers a lot of things. It uncovers why they're starting the company, why they are the right person to start this company, what the authenticity of their connection with the problem is, how the co founders knew each other, and all of those things. I think those are very important and really put into place very early on the DNA of the company and what it will become.
And then beyond, I mean, once you get the founding story, I mean, then what's your kind of rubric to evaluate companies, whether you invest or advise or help the founders or want to get involved? Like, what is that thought process like for you?
At the early stage, I have increasingly started to believe that companies fail because of failure to escape competition.
Mm.
I think it was a Peter Thiel quote. And what that means is, especially at the early stage, if you see six companies doing the very same thing or some, it's very hard to know. They're all good teams. So unless I've worked with the person or team for several months or years beforehand, it's very hard for me to invest. So increasingly, I've actually made this mistake where I've invested in I would say, a really good team in a space which I think is really good and they have the right, but there's two other teams or three other teams who are also authentically strong to compete in that space. And basically, one of the other teams essentially becomes the winner. And so, as you know, there is in technology markets, there's a winner takes all phenomenon where the winner in a market is 100x more valuable. Look at Uber's market cap versus Lyft's market cap, 150 billion versus 5 billion, right?
It's crazy.
And so I think if you look at that, then it's very important if you're investing. Now, there are investments I will make just in people, regardless of what they're doing, because these are friends, these are colleagues. I'll invest in them. But from a pure investment mind point, there are two questions every investor needs to answer. One, is this a market with a deep enough profit pool? First of all, is a good market, and there are some markets that you're too early in, and by the time it might never be it might be 20 years from now it's a good market. Like grocery delivery is a great example. There was demand, but when webvan was started in the late 90s, but it was not a good market then. It became a much better market 15 years later with the advent of mobile phones, on demand labor, all of those things. So is there a deep market? Is there a profit pool? And second, is this, which also includes, like, what is the secular trend that you're looking at? Is there something new that's changing in the market? Is this a good market emerging? Second, is this the right team and company to win this? Is this the right team and company to win this? So that's a problem in early stage today, in seed today. There's just every idea that you look at, every idea you got to do a quick Google search, if at the very least, or YC company search, and you will find that there are 6 companies to 10 companies chasing the same idea. I mean, I met an AI SDR company the other day. I mean, that's a great space. I think SDRs, that job is probably going to be automated to some part by AI. But then 2 days later, I met another AI SDR company. And then a few days later, I met another AI SDR company. And then let me go do a Google search. If you search a Google search AI SDR, the first page is full of AI SDRs. So increasingly, I am subscribing to, at the early stage, go as weird and contrarian as possible, even if it means creating a market and creating a category. Because at the seed stage, I think it's just too hard to pick. If there are 6 good teams, there's competition and it could quickly become a red ocean market with everyone just beating each other up. Anyway, long story short, at the early stage, I think I'm always excited to help founders. But if I see even two other, it's really venture funded companies you look at, right? If there's a legacy competitor, that's a great thing. 20 years old, that's ripe. Or if there's no competitors. If there's three other venture funded companies or two others founded in the last 5 years, pause. At the same, around the same stage, or one stage earlier, one stage later, just pause. Just too
Interesting.
hard,
Yeah,
too hard at the seed.
I had a conversation with a good friend of mine who's a pretty active angel investor in LA, and he sort of echoed that, which was like, you got to invest in, at least in LA, because we don't have access to as much as like really just like the sort of frontier tech that is up north. It's like you have to go invest in weird things. So he was like, his example was he saw a bunch of like AI contract like optimization tools, for like finance teams, and he's like, I don't know. It's just like we got to go find something that's super weird, and then that could work. Who
Exactly.
knows? Yeah.
I think if you look at some of the best investments of the last 2 decades, SpaceX, super weird. Palantir, super weird. Anduril, super weird, right? If you look at those companies, I increasingly feel that pure software is no is almost a down the fairway thing, where it's just everyone believes it, and so you're going to see, that's the thing. YC is creating a bunch of 120 companies, 120 founding teams who you might think have ideas, but really on day one they all discard their ideas, most of them, and are basically searching for ideas. And guess where they go to, right? They look at what the hottest trend is, and they figure out what industries there are, B2B. They systematically go through it, and then they focus on idea. And so there was, I think, one of the classes, a couple of classes ago, had 5 or 6 companies doing AI for customer support, for example, which is again a idea that there's like 12 companies, and then we don't know who the winner is going to be.
Yeah. And you are such an active investor, but I'm curious, are you part of a fund, or do you have your own fund, or is it purely just you're going out and doing early stage investing directly? And if you don't have a fund or part of a fund, why has that been kind of a decision on your part?
I think still thinking through it. I think still, I think doing some venture partner stuff and so on. I think you got to find the right folks who
Mm,
complement you, and also the right strategy. I do feel again that the pure early stage strategy is, you got to be very careful and thoughtful. So I think still thinking through that. But yeah, it's, I think, but I have decided that I do want to be an investor, whether investing my capital or others' capital over the next, I think 25 years of being an operator. Let's now, hopefully bring some of those operating mindset and chops to investing and learn. But again, it's fun to learn, fun to be in a new space, and fun to have a beginner's
I think
mindset.
that's a good thing for founders, that's your mindset and direction.
Thank you. Yes,
and
hope so.
and kind of switching gears a little bit, just on kind of another aspect of your career, but just being a board member of these massive publicly traded companies. I think I have no exposure to that. I think most people don't. What is that like? How's that experience been? And like, do you feel like is that a place where you can make a lot of impact? Like, yeah, I think it's
A
so
lot of people
big
ask
to
me
us.
about advice around being a board member. I advise them, you have to always think of two things when being a board member. They sound very glamorous, but you realize that you only enjoy it if it's in a space, and a sector that you feel excited about, because you spend a lot of time with the company. And if it's, say, in a sector that you're not at all excited about, that you don't care about, it quickly becomes, you just start zoning out, and you don't engage as much, and you can't add value as much to the company. So I tell people, and the second thing is, you've got to have really a lot of respect and admiration, and just learn, and hopefully vice versa, from with the CEO and the key leaders of the company. So you've got to have a good relationship with them, and I think those two matter a lot. So don't join a company where you're not excited about the space, and where the CEO and you don't, because ultimately you're going to interact a lot with the CEO. And then, of course, the other board members also, where you look around the table and you feel the other board members are folks you can learn from, and so on. And so I'm lucky that the boards I'm on, the trade desk, the public company boards, the trade desk, Pinterest, Coinbase, are all spaces I'm excited about. I go in, I'm constantly thinking about those spaces. I'm constantly sending ideas to the executive team. I engage outside of the board meeting. That's the other thing. These should be companies where you don't just go to the board. Board meeting is only part of half of the work of a board member. A lot of the work happens outside of the board meetings, where you're on WhatsApp, or Slack channels with the company, and you're sending ideas, referring, trying to help close candidates, having dinners with the exec team, all of those things. So that's been the biggest learning for me has been an understanding of what board members think about. I think the board role over the years, I think, has gone from somewhere. I think 20 years ago it was more command and control. The old school mindset was. Now it is an advisory role. And the other difference is, I think you guys will both appreciate this. I think there's a lot of value. I think board members are very financial focused about 20 years ago. Over the last 10 years, there's been a movement where almost every company has product and engineering leaders on the board. And I think that's for the good, because companies are realizing that they need that DNA on the board, not just investor DNA on the board or finance DNA on the board. So you do see a much more diverse board from an experience perspective. Finance will be there, of course, but also you'll see voice of the customer, folks who come from that customer's archetype, product engineering, all of those different skill sets that are needed at the company level are also increasingly represented at the board level.
And have you found that, I'm hearing you describe it is very interesting, that kind of evolution of board and the board role. But I imagine too, if you're getting product and engineering leaders, customer leaders, someone like you, like those are operators. Those are people that have been in the trenches and have run businesses and have had P&L versus maybe strategy or finance teams that were a little more removed from the business itself. Have you found, either for yourself when you first started boards or kind of new board members, that it's hard to decouple that like operator mindset from more of an advisory strategy mindset?
100%. It's a great point. I think as a first board, you'll always find yourself always trying to be more prescriptive because you think that's what the company wants you to do. But no, the company doesn't want you to be prescriptive. The company doesn't need to be prescriptive. Ultimately, the team that's running the company is the executive team. What they want you to do is to speak up, is to ask questions, is to ask the right questions, and to challenge the company's thinking, to make it more expansive, but also to let them know, like on one side, make it, there should be board members who expand the company's thinking, and there should be other board members who make sure the company knows the guardrails to operate within. And I think there's a push and pull at the board. I think if everyone is rah, 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 go expanding, the company could do things that are undisciplined. Everyone's like, well, just look at EPS, earnings per share, and grow profits. Then you have no one pushing for growth, for expansion, to enter new markets. So I think there's a push and pull. But to your point, it has to be done in a Socratic way. It has to be done in, oh, you should do, it can't be you should do this. Never. I think I had, I've been on like 12 boards over the years. First two companies died, et cetera, et cetera. But went from, hey, let's do this, or you should do this, to, what do you think about this? Have you guys thought about this? Etc. It's all phrased, flamed, in a way that really gets them to spark thinking. Or, I saw this company doing this. Have you considered something like this? And just to spark discussion. That's a goal. And then you got to be open. The board also has to, hey, can we have a discussion next time about this topic? And really get the company, let's have a discussion around it. And I think that's basically good companies now. Really, again, I think encourage the board to companies to think of the board as advisors who can really provide value through their experience and help the company just think through one or two, because most of the companies focus on execution. Let's be clear, right? The board's job is to, of course, monitor the results of execution, but really what lies ahead. Keep urging them, pushing the company. What lies around the corner? What lies 1 or 2 years out? Are we prepared? Because the board is going to be here long term, is going to be a steward. Really, we represent the shareholders. Are we creating shareholder value in not just a short term, but in the medium to long term? So are we balancing all those three?
Yeah, as you say that, one thing that sort of comes to mind, and I know this is probably, it's you look at Pinterest, Trade Desk, and Coinbase, like three companies that have been super strategic. Like Trade Desk, you probably can't comment on this stuff, but it's like Trade Desk, like it's amazing that this DSP became this big, right? Like no other DSP figured out how to do this, and like Jeff and team figured it out. Coinbase was 2 years ago, or 18 months ago, whatever the stock was, and like they fought through it, and now it feels like they definitely are on the right trajectory. And then Pinterest too has been through like all these different iterations, but if you look at it now, people are starting to get this is the intersection of retail media and advertising. And so have you seen, is that another example of leadership founders like having a plan and sticking with it and getting buy-in from the board? Or is that a function of the boards being these kind of you know sort of somewhat democratic open spaces where everyone could kind of strategize together. I don't know if there's some sort of lesson in that.
Yeah, I think those three companies are really good examples. I think each of them, I would say, each company is a special snowflake, right? But I think there are a few threads that come out. The importance of focus. One of the things that Trade Desk did really well, I think, is that from day one, they always focus on serving the agency and being a tool for the agency. They never tried to disintermediate the agency and go to the brand direct. And I think they had many competitors in the early days, as you know, DSPs. But the DSPs, I think, either tried to go to the brand in addition to the agency because they wanted everything, or they succumbed to the allure of basically also trading themselves, becoming an ad network because that was easy revenue, right? Let's run some dollars. And I think not succumbing to either of those, even though it took longer to penetrate the agencies, it paid dividends over the long term. So I think that focus was really critical. The same with Coinbase. I think they didn't abandon crypto. Obviously, that was their DNA. That's the core of the company, and they stuck with it. And they know. I mean, I think if you can plan for cycles, crypto does go through cycles, and you just need to plan for it. I think that. So I think the best CEOs, what they do is they communicate to the board ahead of time a strategy, and then, of course, the board gives feedback on the strategy and helps them ask questions, but then they execute on the strategy. I think Bill Reddy at Pinterest, who's a new CEO for the last year and a half, has done the same thing. When he came in, he articulated a very clear strategy, and basically the board asked questions, and I think he tweaked it a little bit, but then he's executed. Ultimately, great teams set a clear strategy which is differentiated and builds on their strengths. Right? Pinterest strategy is not to be the same as Snap or as Twitter or as Google or as Facebook. It is to be Pinterest and lean in on what matters the most. It's the same as Facebook ads. I remember very well. First version of Facebook ads was really a copy of Google AdWords. It was basically Google AdWords. If you remember this from Shift, I mean, you could just enter keywords, and that didn't really work well because it was not Google. I think that, and so then we changed it to focus on what mattered about Facebook was identity and being able to attach identity to the identity the advertiser has. So custom audiences and really being able to deliver on those objectives. And I think that changed the trajectory of the advertising business. And at that audience thing has now been adopted by everyone, all ad platforms. I'm very proud of that piece. But yeah, I think you've got to lean in. As you grow to be a company, there is temptation to do new things, different things. But if you do a new thing, I don't believe in, conglomerates which do things that are completely disconnected with each other, from each other. I think everything you do, every new product you have, every direction you take has to leverage your strengths, your uniqueness as a company. There should be a reason why it's part of this company versus a standalone separate company.
And
Yeah.
And it is interesting. I mean, those three companies that you just mentioned, Facebook, Trade Desk, and Coinbase, I mean, all kind of transformed their respective industries and were almost counter to the macro incumbencies. I mean, is fighting regulation, right? The Trade Desk has gone very publicly about the open web and the premium web, where there's been this trend over the last 10, 15 years to more walled gardens. And they've stayed very true to their vision, very vocal about that vision. And then, as you just described, Facebook, I mean, transformed advertising to be more interest based and graph based as opposed to keyword or kind of search intent. And so I'm curious, just from your experience from those three or others, like what is that like inside or talking to the leadership teams as you are fighting? I mean, you're fighting waves, right? The natural tendency from if you talk to consultants or kind of early investors, it's like ride a wave, right? Find the wave, ride it, and grow a business along it. Whereas these are really fighting the natural tendencies of the markets. And so what is that? What is that like?
And I'll add Square, right? Square was not supposed to exist. I mean, there had not been a payment company created for decades before Square came on the picture. And in fact, I think by the network Visa and MasterCard rules, the whole notion of connecting a piece of hardware to a phone, that whole thing was disallowed. In fact, you got to break the rules. Is what I mean by that is, in fact, I wrote a blog post on this, and that's I really was exemplified by Square, where Square realized that a lot of these things were not laws, they're rules. The difference between laws and rules is if you break a law, you go to jail. It's made by Congress, is made by the government. Rules are things created by companies or by industry associations, in many cases to keep power in the hands of incumbents or to keep insurgents out. And so I think to foster insurgency, you've got to break rules without breaking laws. And so your general counsel is a very important part of the picture. Right? At Square, I think we had counsel who were very, very good at understanding, is this really a rule or a law? And many of them turns out were rules. Almost in every country that Square went, there was an oligopoly of banks or incumbents who had rules to prevent entry of new entrants into the payment space because they owned the space. And so Square had to figure out how to navigate that and break rules in ways that wouldn't land us in jail, but still would let us build a product. Otherwise, if you just wait around, you basically will never be able to even launch your product because the rules are against it. So I think we've got to just break the rules without
And
breaking laws.
and once you kind of had to know the rules that you want to break, yeah, I feel like maybe Trade Desk is a really good example of this, and Coinbase. It's like they also kind of identified like an enemy to some extent, and is
And
that
people love the fact that you stand for something and you get to
totally?
stand for something. Who doesn't like standing for openness, for financial freedom, for transparency, for serving the small business? So you need to stand for something and make it, like you said, a movement. Exactly. And I think it's there's books on this, I think, but you're right. I mean, it's there's always, I think, even Intuit versus Microsoft back in the day, you stand for something against the empire, essentially.
Yeah, it's
you
it.
don't you don't even start out by thinking that way, but it just positioned, and your customers are thinking of it that way, and you basically become hopefully the face of the movement. Square definitely was, I think. But you got to, I think I would always say, instead of I think it's best, and that's what I think Trade Desk Coinbase have done, is focus on the customer, and then the customer is the one who tells the story and who basically stands for that. Because you don't want to stand explicitly against something, you want to stand for something. And so what you want to stand for is financial freedom, as the case of Coinbase. What you want to stand for is openness in advertising, as the case of Trade Desk. What you want to stand for is SMBs. And so I would say standing for something is better, because it automatically paints whoever is against you as the against, but you are the for. That's a more positive way in some ways of framing it. And I think that's what you want. Because if you're only against, the question is, what are you for if you're against something? So it's better to be for something, which in of itself definitionally might be against something which is not great.
Yeah, I think I love that idea of just like the insurgency, right? These companies are the
So
insurgents,
it's very good, great insight there.
and
Yeah.
so I mean, I guess moving as we look to kind of wrap. I know kind of we want to be conscious of your time, but as we look to wrap the conversation, like what are those new technologies or those new companies that you're excited about that as we think about them as like insurgents, like who are the new insurgents, right? What are the insurgencies? What are the markets that are being attacked right now, or where there's opportunity for that innovation to take place? Like, what are you most excited about?
I'm most excited about, obviously, AI is going to be an important part of it, but I'm most excited about how AI impacts the physical world. In other words, I, for example, 2 days ago met an AI law company where it's not software for lawyers, but it's actually a law firm which is built ground up using AI, where they have a small number of lawyers, but they have an AI layer on top where all cases, all jobs they get in are first processed by AI. And then in 20-30% of cases, the human kicks in, and there's human review a little bit. And so what they see is the cost per job of a law firm at a traditional law firm in the US is $500. This company has a cost of 1.59 per job, $1.59, which is 300x cheaper than the law
Yeah.
firm. So think about the compression that's going to happen. Obviously, it's early days. They're still looking for license, but they're quickly getting customers. And I think it's going to happen in every industry, where I think that's what I was saying. Software might not have a moat anymore. What might have a moat is a vertically integrated company that has humans and software together, that are delivering the service. And initially, humans might be 60%, software might be 40. Then over 2-3 years, software 60, humans 40, and then 10 years from now, software 80 or 90, humans 20. Customer support, obviously, we are seeing a massive shift there, where humans were 80% or 90%. Now humans increasingly are 50%, software is 50%, and you will see software becoming probably. So I think you're going to see AI employees and AI, what we call now, I'm sure you heard this term, service as a software, as legal service. This is why I think companies might get to a point you hear about, hopefully the emerging companies with 5, 10 people, at $100 million revenue scale or even $1 billion revenue scale, because all those services you want a legal service? Here, just submit this, and you'll basically get a certified, not just a chat GPT like thing, but it'll be legally certified that yes, this is represented liability, all those claims are. Then you want, accounting service, here you go, just upload this. So you can basically run everything in an outsourced way. You just build your product. Even product building, it's like we saw, I'm sure you've seen this, Upwork and Fiverr are two marketplaces where people put jobs. We have seen that the number of low cost jobs there is shrinking, low paying jobs. Why? Because those are, I think, going to AI tools at this point. They're not going to human freelancers anymore. So everyone has to up their game now, because AI is taking over the low skill jobs in every vertical, including software development.
And given that, if you were like 23 today, like just out of college, what would you do? Like, given that that's the landscape, it's like, do you, it's like kind of like, do you tell, like, do you be a PM? Like, what would you do given the sort of this future that you kind of just laid out?
I've always felt that early in your career, you want to build a few skills. You don't want to go too niche. You want to build analytical skills, product building skills, even sales skills, marketing skills. You want to build 3 or 4 different skills. I don't think you need to build all four. I think you need to build a deep set of skills either in product development or in sales and marketing. I think either in building or selling, right? Those are the two fundamental skills. You need to spend 4 or 5 years building one of those two skills, and ideally building it with great people. I think most importantly, pick people that are amazing, that almost are like so good that you would work for them for free in some ways, or very low pay. It doesn't should not optimize for pay. Work for great people and build deep skills. After 4 or 5 years, the reality is product building skills will adapt to the age of AI, will adapt. Just like 20 years ago it was a very different product development environment. Today it's different. 10 years from now it's going to be different. Similarly, sales and marketing is, think about sales and marketing when Juno existed or DoubleClick, you had to go and call on every person in person. Now it's a completely different space. In 10 years from now, it's going to be different. But if you have those core skills, no one can take those away from you. Those are skills. And then learn how to learn new things. That's the other thing. I think we all need to become good at learning, because if there's one thing we've all seen, the pace of new things coming, pace of new technology development is going to accelerate. So be adept at learning in that space you're in. So I think you've got to think of it either as a builder or a marketer and seller. You've got to be one or the other. And then I think every company has both those. And I would say then build a startup. I think, but you got to first, I always say build a startup in college or build a startup a few years out of college. Don't build a startup immediately out of college, because you need to build some skills first. Build some real life skills, work with some great people, look at the definition of, understand what excellence means in terms of hiring, executing, all of those things. So work at an AI company. I think work at any good AI company. If the success of it doesn't matter, get exposed to what AI is about. Start thinking about AI and build that skill in product development or sales and marketing, and then go from there. Work at 2 or 3 companies with great people.
Gokul, I think that's a great segue as we look to wrap. I think you do a ton of writing and teaching. I think about a lot of these topics, whether it's sales and marketing, culture, kind of early stage growth, operating, just a host of topics. So, where can listeners read some of your writing, follow you on any of the social channels, or learn more about your background?
Oh, thanks for saying that. I'm always excited for folks to hopefully find some helpful content. But if you go to Gokul R on Twitter, that's my Twitter handle, or I should say X handle. So that's where I post most. I also post on LinkedIn, but Twitter and LinkedIn have very similar content. I cross post on both. And then if you search for my name, you'll find about 14, 15 Medium articles I wrote, which still a bunch of startups ping me about implementing them, which are more longer form articles. But X is where it's just easier and faster to post almost on a daily basis there versus writing a long form article. I've seen ironically that it's easier for me because of low barriers to entry to write a 500 word thing on X than sit in front of Medium or Substack It's somehow I have writer's block when I open a medium of Substack. When I open up Twitter, it's much easier to just type something out, and before you know it, it's like 300-400 words. So crazy how that works. Just changing how you interact the same content. You feel like, oh, it's just going to go into the ether versus it's something that's like an article you're writing. It puts more burden
Yeah.
on it.
Yeah,
Cognitively.
definitely. But Gokul, thank you so much for joining us today. We'll share your site and your X account with everyone so they can get in touch. But thank you.
That was really thoughtful. A great set of questions, Daniel and James. Thank you.